one of the most important things is your relationship with time.
So how do we create growth? How do we stretch ourselves?
What's the best way to actually get things done in this new type of world of work?
Well, I have 4 children. I'm married. I have a busy life, like we all do. But I'm a big believer in flipping the traditional model of building your resume and turning it upside down. And I believe in building your life resume. And that's what makes me tick. I'm fueled by experiences, and I'm very, very aware of my own mortality and how much time I have left to do the things that I want to do. Yeah. So I have a very, very big focus on and belief that if you build your life resume, you could be a better employee, you can land your dream job, it can help you get a promotion, because the more you experience, the more you have to offer. Yeah. And, you just become more interesting and you become more invigorated. So this journey was part of that, building my life resume. But what happened was I realized that I'd focused so much on the physical side for years of my life. I have a trainer. I've run marathons, work out, just like everybody else. I've invested so much in that. So much of my daily time is in training or working out. And I've invested very little time in the spiritual and emotional side. And I believe that our greatest secret weapon that we all have, we're all armed with it, and it's really guided me my whole life. It's been my superpower. And when you get a 980 on your SATs, you got to rely on this, and that's instinct. And my intuition and my instinct, which is my superpower, it started to go away because I got Siri, I got Alexa, I got the news influencing me. I can ask Alexa questions. I'm getting bombarded by, social media and text messages and emails. I'm losing my superpower because I don't spend any time alone. I don't spend time thinking. Yeah. Alexa thinks for me. Google thinks for me. Right. You have to remember that a lot of things that we do, everything we do is cumulative. Yeah. It's cumulative. So, and everyone's like, uses this as an excuse. They use moderation. You hear like, oh, everything in moderation. But the reality is moderation can be an excuse. If you have an ice cream cone every single day, you're like, I'm only having an ice cream cone today. I'm having 1 ice cream cone. What's the big deal? But you do it for 10 years. You're going to have 3,000 ice cream cones. That's a big deal over time. And I just started again. It goes back to my relationship with time. Yeah. People think of relationships in terms of people, their kids, their parents, but they don't look at one of the most important things is your relationship with time. And I started looking at this and like, I'm doing 3 hours a day. That's not a big deal. I'm watching a football game. That's what went through my head. What's the big deal? Yeah. I'm watching a football game, man. Yeah. But when you add up Thursday, Saturday, college, Sunday night, Monday night, fantasy football, all that stuff, which I love. Over the next cumulative 30, 35 years, that would have been 36,000 hours of my life. That's a long time. Yeah. I can't do the math in my head, but it's got to be a year or two of your life, your life. Yeah. And that's, I don't even remember if the Jets beat the Bills 3 years ago. Right. Who cares?
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter, man. It matters in the moment. And I still watch football. Yeah, I enjoy it.
For sure.
But I became aware of it, right, and I eliminated it because you know what happens? Something has to give. As you put more on your plate of things you want to do, for you, it's a podcast, it's business, it's changing lives, it's inspiring, it's growing this followers in your podcast, all the stuff that you're doing. As you do that and you spend more time, something has to give. Yeah. Either you're going to spend less time with your family or less time watching TV or whatever, right, but you can't keep putting stuff on your plate and expecting that ultimately it's going to overflow. Yeah. So for me, with 4 kids and a business and a wife and hobbies and all kinds of stuff, the easy thing to eliminate was the stuff that wasn't moving the needle. I have 4 buckets. I have my wellness bucket, my family bucket, my personal bucket, and then I have like causes that are like I'm passionate about, plus friends and a miscellaneous. But those are like my 4 buckets. Yeah. If something is not moving the needle in one of those 4 buckets, at this point in my life, I just turned 50, that's a waste. It's just a waste. If it's not helping with my family, my fitness, my wellness, my business, it's a waste. And I try to eliminate it. Yeah. So
That's respect because, and you've heard this as well. A lot of people are, they pipe on and kind of hold up that sign of like, I just don't have the time. I want to work on my fitness. I want to have a great relationship. I want to make more money, but I don't have the time. And the reality is we all have the same 24. And to see what somebody like yourself is doing with that 24 hours, but real talk too, we all do need downtime for sure.
yeah,
But some of that, like I said, I had a similar experience. I was in college. This was my last semester. I was already a strength and conditioning coach. Was doing pretty well for myself. But I was watching every baseball game, and they play a lot of games, man. In
Yeah.
St. Louis here, it's baseball heaven is what they call it,
Yeah.
So, and I know all the stats. I know everybody's, I know their kids' names,
Right.
I'm just watching, I'm doing my homework, got the game on. And just one day it struck me, I'm watching them be great. And I'm saying I don't have time, because I got school and I got, this business I'm trying to build and help people. And I'm trying to learn stuff, but I'm just like, I'm at a stalemate. And I realize I'm watching them be great.
Yeah.
I'm not even playing the game. I don't plan on playing the game. And so it just changed. And for me, I went like cold turkey and I just like literally turned off my cable for a couple of years. And I grew so much in that time, and of course, like I would still watch movies here or there, whatever, but I just focused on my own greatness instead of watching other people be great. And with that said, again, it's cool to watch football, but I would watch the game.
Yeah.
Then I watched the game after the game. Then I watched people talk about the game for an hour and watch the highlights of the game I just watched. And then I'm like, oh, I'm busy. No, I'm not. So we have to really identify, you said it, awareness is the key. Awareness trumps everything, begins that process. So that's such a great piece of advice. And
Man, I don't even understand how people can not work on themselves. Like, I just don't understand how you can go through life. You get one life. You don't get a redo. We'll never have another 2018. You got a couple more. It's done. You're never getting your 20s back. I love you, Shawn. You're never getting them back. In one more year, you're never getting your 30s back. It's done. The average American lives to be 78. If you're average, you got 38 years left, okay? 38 summers. That's all you got. Your 70s aren't going to be like they are right now in your 40s. I don't even understand how someone could go through life and not want to be okay being the 80% version of what they could be. I just don't understand it. Like you had mentioned, like, oh, well, let's say somebody doesn't want to work out or something. Like, I don't see how you don't invest in yourself first. I just don't get it. Like, I said to someone, I have a test. I teach this course called Build Your Life Resume. And in my course, I ask people, what if someone gave you $10 million, what would you want to do? What would you do with it? And most people think about it. And first of all, I'm like, how do you even have to think about it? Like, don't you know what you want, out of life or what you would want to do? I mean, what are you working for? But if someone gave you $10 million, what would you do with it? And two things are very interesting. The first thing is, if someone gave you $10 million, the first thing is that most people say they would go on a trip, they would buy something, they would donate the money, they would do whatever's on their list. But it has nothing to do with investing in themselves. Like if someone gave me $10 million, I'd hire a chef, like an organic chef.
yeah,
I would do things that would extend the quality of my life.
Yeah.
I wouldn't buy a Rolls Royce. I would do things that would extend the 60s, 70s, and 80s years of my life. And that's the first thing that was interesting. The second thing is that most of the things on people's lists are things that they could do now. Like my friend's like, oh, I'll move to California. And I'm like,
move.
nobody's moved. Why are you $10 million, man?
Yeah.
Move to California.
Yeah.
What are you doing? You always want to live in California. He's, oh, the time's not right. Da, da, da. I'm like, well, the time is never right.
That's the thing, yeah.
Like everyone. So it's just interesting when you put it, when you start to look at things like that. I put myself in a position where I could ask myself a lot of questions and try to like really figure out like, man, what do I want and what makes me tick? And instead of just going through life in a routine, because in a routine, time goes fast. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden you wake up and you're 70. The average American gains 2 pounds between 35 and 60. Now you're 50 pounds overweight. You're 60 or 70 years old and you can't do the things that you wanted to do. And now it's over. And that means you now are going to have regret of what you didn't do. That's the last thing I want. That's the last thing I want, man. I don't want to wake up and be like, I regret that I didn't do this. So you got to think about it. You got to spend time and think about what's important to you. And I'm not telling anyone how to live their life. I'm not a guru. I mean, I'm not Wayne Dyer. I'm not any of that. I'm just telling you, for me, these things are really important and they work for me. And I think it's important that you give a little time and think about this stuff. We just constantly every day have arrows coming at us, things, requests for our time. Hey, Shawn, man, can I get you for 15 minutes? Just get a quick bite so I can understand this podcast game. And Shawn, can I borrow $100 from you? And and we're just bombarded with arrows. Then those are arrows that come at us from people. Then we have arrows like our toilet breaks and we have to fix it, or we save a lot of money, but then the roof leaks and 6 months of savings. Now we got to go fix the roof. And dodge the arrows just means creating a system where you can eliminate some of that. And I talk about it in the book, some of that noise, and it gives you just guidelines to say no, boundaries to give yourself permission to say no to things, so you can kind of regain control of time.
And especially with the finite amount of time we have here in this human experience, it's important to really invest in the things that light you up and that you're inspired about as much as you can. And so I think that's great advice, man. So what about, I love this one, go where you think best.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I think thinking is a lost art form, like I mentioned earlier. And for me, I realize that I think best in two places. I think very well on an airplane, staring out the window and daydreaming. That's where I get a lot of my goals. And that's where I just get clarity. No one can bother me on an airplane. I'm not getting phone calls on an airplane. I don't put my Wi-Fi on a lot of times on the airplane. So I don't just take fake flights just to think. But I appreciate that time and I use it for thinking. Also in the car, I like to drive and daydream. And the third for me has really been running. So wherever it is that you think best, it's important to spend a lot of time there.
Yeah.
Because that's where you can often get clarity, make big decisions, get ideas. And, you're not going to think great when you're in a crowded space at a bar.
Right.
So I try to put myself in a position where I think best as often as I can. My wife thinks best in a car. She set up a fake commute. We live 5 minutes from Spanx, her headquarters, but rather than just drive 5 minutes to work, she set up a 40-minute fake commute so she can spend 40 minutes just thinking before she goes into the office.
Wow, that's so smart, and something that we all can find creative ways to do. Let me ask you about one more of these. This monotask. What's that about? Hashtag monotask.
Yeah, man. I thought because I have a massive to-do list that the best way to get things done was to multitask. Okay, let me send out this thing right here, get on this interview right now, go, and I got to do it, and I'm like 1,000,000 miles an hour. And all I wanted to do was cross things off my list because it felt good to cross them off my list. When I was at the monastery, the monks didn't have a to-do list. They just had a do list. Whatever they were working on, they did it. There was no clock. They did it until it was 100% done to the best of their ability, and then they went on to the next task. They were always where their feet were. They were always present. And they really reinforced to me the importance of monotasking, doing one thing at a time, being where your feet are. I remember, and I'll give you an example just to put it in perspective. I remember when I was cleaning dishes at the monastery. You're going to get to this chapter soon. And they just had a retreat. So they had like 500
I read
dishes.
This part. Crazy.
Yeah. And they treated me like a pledge. So I'm cleaning all the dishes. They're all, out doing their own thing, reading, kicking it, whatever. And I'm doing the dishes by myself, washing them and drying them. And I got like 450 dishes left. And one of the monks walks in. He's like, how's it going? I'm like, man, I'm never going to finish this. I got 400 dishes, I had nothing else to do, so it didn't really matter. And he looked at me, he's like, you don't have 400 dishes. You only have the dish that's in your hand. And I was like, wow, you're right. Let me get this dish clean. Now let me grab the next dish. And let me get this dish clean. Instead of having to worry about how am I going to get to all 500. It's the same thing your friend's going to do when he runs his 100-mile race.
Yeah.
He doesn't have 100 miles. He has the moment that he's in right now
The
until
next
he's
step.
until he's done.
Yeah. That's so powerful, man. Wow. So what has been your kind of spillover since this experience that you've noticed specifically in your life that's different or improved as a result of your time there?
We just talked about one of them a minute ago, and that's just saying no. You know, the importance of putting more things on my plate that I like to do and doing them with the people that I love to do them with. That's been really important. I realized right when I came home at the monastery, all the decisions are taken away from you. You eat whatever they serve you. You eat when they give it to you. You wear one hour, I showered once. You wear one outfit. Nothing matters. So all the decisions that we have day to day that we don't even think about, you know, what station should I put on the radio? What am I going to wear today? You know, am I putting cologne on? Whatever. We just do it. We don't even think about it. But they say the average American makes like 35 to 50,000 decisions a day. That's exhausting. And when you eliminate some of those decisions, when they don't live in your head, when you feel so overwhelmed with things in your head and you get them out and you put them on paper, get them out of your head, it frees up a tremendous amount of energy. Like by day 6 of the monastery, because I was making no decisions, I had boundless energy. I'm a high energy guy anyway.
Right.
Like cuckoo energy. Because I wasn't thinking about all the things I had to do in my to-do list and who I had to email. I didn't have to email anybody back. I'm off email. So when I tried to carry as much of that back into my modern life as I could when I came back. And that meant, you know, not being attached to my phone so much, saying no, not feeling just because someone emails me, I got to respond to them instantly.
Yeah.
You know, like I get an email. If I don't respond in 20 minutes, I get a question mark back. Like, everything okay? Like, what do you mean, man? Like, I just got out of the shower. I have to respond to you. Why do I have to respond? Just because you emailed me. Now you control my time. And when I'm going to respond back to you, I'm going to stop what I'm doing with my son to respond to you. I can't wait till tomorrow, you know? So I could talk for hours about this stuff, man, but I try to create the life more around the way that I wanted to live it.
Yeah. There's this new term in psychology called decision fatigue.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I like to look at it like a battery.
I have it in my book.
Really?
Yes.
So you got
this
battery, and every decision you make, it's taking that battery down. And if you get down to E on your battery at the end of the day, you're not, first of all, the quality of your decisions goes down. That's a big thing. So you're deciding whether or not you're going to eat the Haagen-Dazs or the green smoothie.
Man, I fully believe that.
Yeah. And so also the amount of pressure that it adds to you. Every decision we make, it takes some glucose out of your brain. And your brain, even though it's like 2 pounds-ish of your mass, it uses 25% of your calories because of all the processing. And those decisions is slowly taken away. So I love that advice of trying to have some of the decisions that in your life that you do on a daily basis taken out. You know, like what you're going to eat, for example. If you got stuff kind of planned or somebody helps to put your meals together, I think that's huge. That's another reason people succeed that do the meal prepping.
That's how I live my life. I think it's important to have a system that works best for you, you know, but my advice would be build your life resume. Your life resume is as important, if not more important, than your business resume or anything else. If you have a chance to create a memory or a moment or an experience, take advantage of it, because you just don't know if you're going to get that again. And you don't want to wake up at 70 and be like, oh, I can't believe I spent all my time in an office. I know you got to work. People got to make money. I'm not saying that. But you got to put things on your calendar that are experiential. You got to invest in experiences.
Deep work is my term for the activity in which you are focused without distraction for a long period of time on a cognitively demanding task, right? So it's got to have your full attention. And when I say no distraction, I mean not even a glance at a phone or a glance at an inbox. It has to be completely locked in attention on something that's cognitively challenging for you. That is deep work. Almost every other activity you do, by definition, will then say is shallow work. So you can really think about all of your professional activities as being one of these two things. It's either deep or it's shallow. I think we have it completely wrong how we're approaching work in the knowledge workplace. I mean, this is familiar to me. It's like when I arrived at college and said, wow, these other students are terrible at studying. And if we're a little bit smarter about it, you can do much better. I see the same thing in the modern knowledge workplace, that we are working in ways that are actual terrible ideas if your goal is to take a bunch of human brains, connect them up in networks, and produce things that are valuable. So what we're doing now in the modern workplace is, instead of the deep work, which is the best way to actually take your brain and produce valuable things with it, which is the primary goal of knowledge work. Instead of doing this, we filled the days with these sort of shallow activities, mainly communication, talking about work, sending emails, responding to emails, the video game challenge of trying to stay on top of an inbox without the unread messages getting too large, going from meeting to meeting. None of this is directly related to using your cognitive resources to produce something valuable. And so what I think is going on is that knowledge work, especially in the age of digital networks, is just really, really new. I mean, if you go back and look at how people used to run factories in the very early days of the Industrial Revolution, it didn't look like Henry Ford's efficient assembly line. We were running these things in incredibly inefficient ways because it was new and it was complicated, and we stuck with things that were kind of convenient and easy. That's where I think we are in knowledge work right now. This idea that we should all just be hooked up to communication channels, maybe some Slack channels or an email inbox where we have an email address associated with our name. We should just be sending messages back and forth all day, sort of working things out on the fly in an ad hoc manner and jumping in and out of meetings. I mean, all of this is just like the very early stage Industrial Revolution factories. There's new technologies, there are new pressures in the economy, and we haven't yet figured out what's the right way to work. So deep work in some sense is my attempt to help start the inevitable conversation, which is, okay, what's the best way to actually get things done in this new type of world of work?
Man, this is ringing true. And also, this really brings up for me even how our education system is set up. It's still set up in very much the same way as the assembly line worker, getting people ready to work in a factory job or on a farm or something. And we should be getting people prepared for working in this environment of knowledge workers. And of course, schools are changing somewhat, but, books like this I think it's a real valuable tool for us to get our hands on. We don't have to wait around for the curriculum to change. And so I want to talk about a couple of the value points of deep work. And there's two in here that you talk about. The first has to do with learning. And I think this directly goes in with kids as well as us as people that are in the workforce and creating value. So let's talk a little bit about that, why deep work has this great value in as far as learning is concerned.
Yeah, this is one of the primary reasons why I think deep work should be a tier 1 skill for anyone in the knowledge economy. It's because the better you are at concentrating intensely, the easier it is for you to learn complicated things fast. So if you are very comfortable with intense concentration, when it comes time to learn a new system, a new idea, new types of mathematics or information system or new business strategy, whatever it is, the type of thing that changes incredibly rapidly right now in our current economy, if you're adept at deep work, no problem. Intense concentration equals very fast learning of complicated information. And of course, the flip side is what we should be worried about. If you are completely uncomfortable with intense concentration, if you're of that unfortunate generation that has never known anything but life with ubiquitous access to the internet on a phone in your pocket, and so your brain has never actually established any comfort with long, unbroken concentration, it becomes incredibly difficult for you to pick up complicated things quickly. And this is a huge disadvantage in the knowledge economy. I mean, this is really going to put you behind and make it much harder for you to get ahead, for you to actually move ahead in your career. So the ability to learn quickly is one of the key superpowers that deep work provides you.
Wow, man. This is really troubling. I mean, like when you said it, it kind of hit me like our kids are literally growing up with this technology and just instant access to distraction, 24/7. Like my son who's in high school, I'm still just kind of fascinated that they can use their phones in class. Like I remember I was one of the first kids to have, and this is really messed up, but I had a beeper, right? And my beeper got taken, just for having it at school. And now it's just like, oh yeah, you've got class time. You can, jump around on. I'm like, why is my son sending me memes at school, But it's just the nature of the situation.
It's a problem. I mean, we're accommodating this, and I really don't think we should. I mean, we're so quick to adjust and say, well, look, kids these days need to be on these phones, looking at this information, connecting with each other. That's just sort of what it means to live in the high-tech world. But we forget that most of these tools, the tools that are capturing their attention, that are hurting their ability to concentrate, to function in our economy, these are products of the digital attention economy, right? I mean, these are tools that are invented primarily just to extract time and attention from people that can be repackaged and sold to advertisers. It's taking the value that you could be producing as an individual by learning something new or building something new or connecting with your family or friends or being a part of your community. It's taking this value that you're capable of producing as a human being, and instead it's extracting it away and locking it up in the stock price of a small number of these large companies. It's allowing Mark Zuckerberg to have a massive house or 3 or 4 massive houses instead of you being able to learn something hard so you can feed your family better. In other words, what I'm trying to argue is the thing that's, especially with young people, that's capturing their time and attention is not some fundamental technology that's at the core of what it means to function in the modern age. It's basically just a tool for advertisement delivery. And so it's not just that we're giving up this tier 1 skill of deep work, but we're doing it so that a small number of advertising selling firms can do better. And I don't mean to go on a sort of conspiratorial rant here, but you have to understand right now, Facebook is valued by market cap $150 billion more than ExxonMobil. They're finding it to be remarkably more lucrative to extract time and attention out of our heads than ExxonMobil is finding to extract oil out of the ground, oil that we actually need to fuel all of our car and our machineries. They're making more money. It's more valuable extracting time and attention out of our head. These are behemoth companies. The attention economy has never had companies as large as companies like Facebook is right now. We've never had companies that were so large and so powerful built just on trying to distract us and just take our time and attention. And so deep work in some sense is a rallying call to say, I am more interested in using my capacity as a human being with a brain capable of doing magnificent things. I'm more interested in using this capacity towards learning hard things and producing things of value, for connecting with my family, for being a part of my community. I'm less interested in giving 340 minutes a week, the average amount of time the average American uses Facebook products, to these large, massive advertising conglomerates. Focus is deeply human. Focus is deeply productive. The ability to do this is something that we should be demanding to be in our life, something that we should be cherishing and seeking. So I'm ranting. I'm a nerd. I'm a focus nerd. I'm a nerd about focusing. But as you can see, it's something I get energized about, because I think this is a huge issue on a lot of fronts in our current age.
Wow. I'm just imagining Mark Zuckerberg trolling you like, no, I'm a different kind of nerd. But the reality is, as like you said, when we're truly focused, when we truly give something our attention, that's where beauty really takes place. That's where the great depth of our human potential can come out. Just like all of this surface level stuff that we're engaged in, that we're doing, we're not really tapping into our potential. And this even goes to, like you talked about, learning. There's a lot of folks who listen to the show who are in the health and fitness field, or very passionate about it. This is how you actually can engage and create more neural connections in your brain and become very good at things, be it, a physical skill or some knowledge-based thing. There's a couple of ways that we learn. One is through kind of rote memorization and a continued exposure. And then another way is just really through something that's a really emotional, right? An emotional impact. That's why I do these shows, is because I think it hits a real visceral spot for people, get that emotional engagement. But you learn it better, when you're able to truly deeply engage with the information. And so now let's talk a little bit about that, about just kind of what's going on in our brain. So what is all of this distraction actually doing to our brain? I definitely want to talk about the concept of attention residue.
Yeah, well, attention residue, I think, is something we should all be very worried about. I mean, basically, in the late 1990s, people were really into multitasking in the old-fashioned way, where they would actually have 3 windows open at the same time on their computer while they were talking on the phone, and people said, hey, I could do multiple things at once. Okay, pretty quickly we figured out that doesn't work. Right? I can't hear what's going on the phone, or I'm missing what's going on the computer. So people learned, I guess this would be somewhere in the early 2000s, okay, I'm not going to multitask, I'm going to do one thing at a time. But what we started doing instead was almost single tasking. So we just have one window on the computer, we're just doing one thing, except we do these just checks every 5 or 10 minutes. So I think I'm trying to write a chapter, but every 5 or 10 minutes, maybe I have to do a just check on my phone. And then a just check of my Twitter feed, and a just check of Google News to see what's going on. And what we've learned is that there is a phenomenon called attention residue that's making those just checks almost as damaging as pure multitasking. Because what happens is that the damage to your ability to concentrate, your damage of the ability to do high-level cognitive work, it doesn't depend on how long you spend on a distraction. It's the context switch that kills you. So if I switch my attention over to an email inbox, see a couple emails that I can't answer now, I know I need to get back to later, and then switch back to my main task, even if I only glanced at that inbox for 30 seconds, that's going to leave what's called attention residue in my mind, which can reduce my cognitive performance for 10, 15, 20 minutes going forward. Right. The fact that I only looked at my inbox for 30 seconds doesn't matter. It's the fact that I switched my context to the inbox and brought it back that leaves a residue. I mean, this is easy to test in the lab. It's very replicatable. A quick switch of attention from your primary target, and then you come back to your primary target, performance plummets. So what's happening, I think, to most students and knowledge workers today is that they're doing these just checks enough that they are persistently in a state of attention residue. So essentially, we are working today in a state of self-induced, persistent, reduced cognitive capacity. It's like a reverse nootropic. Like if I walked in and said, here's a drug that's going to make you like 20% dumber, like it's just going to slow you down, and I want to make sure that you're taking this all day long, right? You would kick me right out of your office. Like, are you kidding me? Get out of here. But if I do that same thing, but I call it social media or I call it, Gmail, we don't realize it's having the same effect. So I think we're underselling our potential in the economy right now because of the attention residue effect. We don't even realize it.
This is blowing my mind right now because you just said reverse nootropic. And that right there is a perfect selling point. It's just like, why would we want to take something or do something that makes us less efficient, that makes us dumber? Like I think about the Limitless pill, and then we've got like the Lloyd Christmas pill over here, and like so many of us are taking the Lloyd Christmas pill. And so you mentioned that this attention residue, and I also have referred to it as a switching cost, right? There's a cost associated with you jumping back and forth. And I love how you said these just checks. And really, everybody listening, how often do you do that? You might be working on a particular task, something that you need to take care of, but you just check your phone real quick, reach over. And what you're doing every single time is you're laying down more myelin, right, to create this kind of neural association to every time I'm trying to get focused, I distract myself every 5 to 10 minutes. In your brain, it becomes incredibly hard to not do it, right? And we talked about this several times on the show, Cal, of this whole idea and really fascinating way that our brains become hard. Like we're creating physical structure in our brain when we do this to ourselves. So it's just bananas, man.
Yeah. And it is permanent. That's the other scary thing about it. So attention residue is scary because it means you didn't even realize that you're reducing your performance. The hardwiring is the other scary part, that we have this increasing evidence that once your brain becomes used to getting these distractions all the time, it permanently reduces it. So then if you say, okay, you know what, I'm going to go to a cave, somewhere where there's no internet and no electricity, and now I'm going to work really hard on this hard thing, you're going to fail if your brain has been hardwired to expect this. The late Cliff Nass at Stanford had this great research on it where essentially he could compare, he put people who were sort of chronic distracted multitaskers in a lab, and next to him he put people who really didn't do a lot of that in the lab. And they were both cut off from any source of distraction. They said just work on these hard problems. And the chronic multitaskers really had a hard time, even when their sources of distractions were removed from them because the brain had rewired. And you can get it back. And a lot of what I talk about in some of the chapters of my book is essentially what's the cognitive equivalent of sort of getting into shape physically. Mm-hmm. You can do it. It's a pain, but you have to think about it with that same sort of rigor. It's just like if I was going to go run a marathon, I'm going to expect that's going to take a lot of long mornings running around the track. It's the same thing that if you've been a chronic distracted person, if you want to regain a deep work skill, you can do it, but it's not something that you can change tomorrow with a few productivity hacks. It's actually going to take some pretty serious training.
Yeah, it's going to be uncomfortable. Well, I tell people there's this basic, especially when you take on a new habit, there's initially the first phase is like this new phase. It's exciting. I'm going to get started. I'm going to do this new thing. But then you hit the discomfort phase relatively soon, where it's just like, I don't like this. And your brain is even fighting you because it's so used to doing the same thing. And eventually, if you can kind of push through that, and some tools to do that, just immersion, getting yourself in the right environment, the right kind of information, the right messages, creating some situations that, that eliminate some of these things like distractions or the negative foods or whatever, you eventually get to the state of comfort, right? But you still have to consciously think about it. It's like a conscious competence. And eventually you push through that and it becomes necessity, right? I have to work this way. Like that's that phenomenon people feel like I have to work out. You don't hear people say that very often, but when it happens, and that person knows what they mean, so that's where eventually we can all get to. And I want to share this study in your book real quick. So this was A professor at the University of California, Irvine, observed knowledge workers in real offices and found that interruption, even if short, delays the total time required to complete a task by a significant amount. All right. We're mistaking this busy work for actually being effective, right?
Yeah, we're mistaking that for being effective. And I think we're building our work cultures right now primarily around convenience, right? I mean, it's really convenient for everyone involved if everyone can reach everyone else at any point. Because that means you don't have to do much pre-planning of your day. You don't need complicated systems that help decide like how does this type of work get done. You don't have to think ahead. You don't have to have pretty complex productivity type processes in place. If we can all just talk to everyone at any time, it makes your life easier in the moment as a worker. The point is, though, in a business, the goal is not to make life as easy as possible for the worker. It's actually to produce as much value as possible. And those things are usually directly at odds with each other. So that's what's so crazy, I think, right now about the way we run knowledge workplaces. I mean, imagine if I was running a factory and I spent all this money on these robots for building the cars, but I kept, stopping them and turning them off every 20 minutes because whatever, I needed to take a phone call and they were loud and it took a while for them to come back online and we were producing cars at half the rate we could be doing. The factory owners were like, are you crazy? Like, this is a terrible, and if I say, but no, it's convenient. It's just convenient for me just to kind of turn these, they would say, it's crazy. I don't care if it's convenient. Run the factory in an efficient way. We have to have that same type of thinking for the knowledge workplace. I get it that it's easy, that everyone can email everyone at every point. And I get it that it's not obvious how you actually have to run an office if you can't do that. But it wasn't obvious to figure out the assembly line either. But you know what? Henry Ford produced 10x times more cars than all of his competitors once he figured it out. So I think we need more sort of Henry Ford type thinking when it comes to thinking about how do we actually approach work in the knowledge age.
Wow. Have we actually, everybody listening, have you actually thought about how 24/7 people have access to you and you have access to everybody? It's kind of freaky. I was just listening to Chris Rock's new special and he was talking about how when he was a kid, like his father left the house at 6 a.m. and his mother didn't hear from him until 8 p.m. at night, And today it's just like constant, this constant connection. And I'm not saying that this is the reason that my relationship is really beautiful, but my wife, like we've already established that, especially when I'm working and especially engaged in deep work, my notifications are off. Like she's just not going to be able to get in touch with me. And that's okay. Because a lot of times I'm actually just downstairs, But the reality is like having that time away to actually focus on, and I feel so much better because I'm creating something that's truly valuable. I'm creating something great. And I feel fulfilled in my work. And so that carries over into our relationship, I feel. And so just be mindful of that. So what I'm encouraging everybody to do is just think about it. If you've got notifications for everything on your phone, Instagram notifications, Facebook, text, email notifications, I'm just going to throw this out there. You're probably crazy right now, but that's okay. I still love you. Well, you got to back off. Like turn some of those notifications off and allow yourself some mental space to actually get clear and to actually do some deep work. Let's see. I want to talk to you about this concept in the book of the principle of least resistance. All right. Can you share what that is?
Yeah, that's my idea that if you're in, let's say, a work environment, if you don't have metrics, hard data pushing back about what type of activities or behaviors produce more value than others, you can't just measure the number of cars that come off the assembly line per hour. People will default because of human nature to basically doing whatever's easiest in the moment. Right? So this is sort of human nature, is that if you can't push back and say, I know this is easier, but if you do it this hard way, we produce more cars or we make this much more money, we're going to default back to what's easiest in the moment. And my conjecture is, especially in knowledge work, we don't have those clear metrics. We don't have a car coming off the assembly line that we can measure how fast that's happening. So in the absence of those metrics, our behaviors have defaulted back to what's easiest in the moment. So the way that we work today with this sort of constant unstructured communication, this is just the principle of least resistance in play. This is, okay, if my goal is to make sure that my life is as easy as possible in the moment, this is what you would do. And so that's what a lot of our current work cultures are built around.
Right, exactly. So true, so true. And how often do we do that to ourselves as well, especially if we're not if we haven't created the habitual nature of doing deep work, we'll just do the easy stuff. You'll just jump on, maybe do a couple of emails, maybe do this little thing that is only getting a small percentage of the benefit, versus the thing that, like the Brian Tracy eat the frog, doing that big task that can move the greatest amount of leverage in your life. Let's talk about this neurological argument for depth that you cover in the book. You stated that our brains construct our worldview based on what we pay attention to. I thought that was really fascinating. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I was trying to understand this phenomenon that if you spend time with people who are serious deep workers, so they spend large amounts of their time concentrating intensely on a small number of very valuable things, they tend to be happier and more satisfied.
Right.
And this was this interesting phenomenon that kept coming up again and again. In fact, it wasn't even in the original proposal for my book. I added a chapter on this phenomenon because I kept running into it while researching the book. I kept running into this fact that why do these people seem so much more satisfied? And why is it that when you hear about them, you feel this sense of, I wish that was me? What is it that's so good about the deep lifestyle? Well, this is one of the reasons, one of several reasons why a deep life, a life focused on focusing, tends to be more satisfying, is that our sense of the world, we have a lot of evidence, has a lot to do with what we pay attention to. If you're paying attention to a lot of stressful things, your understanding of the world is, well, the world is stressful. If you're paying attention to a lot of bad things, you think, well, the world is bad. This is the classic, if you watch the local news, you're convinced that your city is rife with fires, car crashes, and crimes, because that's all you hear about on the local news. So deep workers avoid a lot of that stress and bad news and anxiety, because instead of jumping around through tons of stimuli all day, they focus on one thing that's important, that's valuable, and they do it well. And so their mind constructs an understanding of the world where there's valuable things in there, you're useful in the world, you're producing something valuable. So it's literally their brain sees the world differently than someone else who spends most of their time jumping around through different stimuli. And I would argue that the human brain is much more well suited for that former approach to the world, and is not very well suited to what we do now, which is let's flood it with stimuli all day long. I mean, that causes a lot of problems at all different ages. And so, deep workers are happier people, and I think that's a big reason why. If you want deep work to be a regular part of your life, you have to recognize that it's very demanding. And therefore, if you don't have some sort of clear and fixed philosophy about how you schedule deep work in your life, it's just not going to happen. Right? I mean, it's the exact same thing with fitness. It's hard to work out. And so if you don't have a really clear philosophy for this is when I go to the gym or this is when I train, you're probably not just going to do it naturally on a whim. So the same thing holds for deep work. So in the book, I started listing different scheduling philosophies that I've seen people successfully deploy with deep work. And the idea was to show not that this was the exclusive list, but to show that there's many different options and that you can tailor a scheduling philosophy to fit your particular personality and circumstances. So for example, one that I observed a lot of people use was called the bimodal philosophy, which is a philosophy where either I'm only doing deep work, and this is for an extended period of time, like 2 days, 3 days, or I'm completely available and connected. And you switch back and forth between these modes. You don't try to mix it together. So I profiled a professor, for example, who does this. When he's working on a paper, he'll drop off the radar for 3 days. You can't reach him. Completely monastic, can't reach him. In between, his door is open, right? Students are coming in, everyone can reach him. So no one's that frustrated. It's not like he's gone for months at a time, but he disappears for a few days at a time so he can clear out all the attention residue. For some people, you can't do that. So another philosophy, for example, is the rhythmic philosophy, which says, okay, same days, same time every week. I don't even want to think about it. It's Wednesday, Thursday, Friday mornings from 7 to 10. That's when I do my deep work. I don't want to think about that. A lot of people, I've seen that be successful. I've seen a lot of CEOs of small startups more recently start to adopt the variation of the rhythmic philosophy called the monk mode morning, which is where they say, and they tell everyone in their organization, starting at 11 or 12 or whatever it is, I'm reachable. Until that point, I'm never reachable. That's when I do my deep work. And everyone just learns. So they know, okay, we don't schedule things there. If we make sure we get him to sign off on something the night before if we need something early. It's a very easy heuristic for everyone to learn, and it frees up for them a consistent large block of deep work. Another philosophy that's common, I call it the journalistic philosophy, which is where you take week by week. What's my reality this week? When am I going to fit in the deep work? So you adjust with the reality of your week. I call it journalistic because journalists are pretty good at switching to writing mode when they have to, because news breaks and they have deadlines. So it's much more of I'm deep worked for 3 hours. Now I'm doing this. No deep work the next day. The next day it's 5 hours in a row. So it's more of a sort of scattered shot. It's more of an advanced strategy. More importantly is the fact that there are different philosophies. So just because one doesn't work for you, don't have that bring you to a point where you say deep work in general doesn't work for me. You can adjust these scheduling philosophies to work with the reality of whatever it is you do. The scheduling philosophy is step one. Step two, people who are adept deep workers tend to have rituals that surround their deep work sessions. I mean, as far as I can tell from a sort of psychological or neurological perspective, what's going on here is if you have some sort of set ritual you do, it helps your brain shift into the deep work mindset without you having to expend a lot of mental energy or willpower to try to wrench your attention away from something else. So Charles Darwin, for example, it's sort of a favorite example of mine. When he was working on the origin of species at his estate in Kent, England, he had built a path. He called it the sand walk because it was paved with sand that went past the most scenic parts of the grounds that he owned. And he built this ritual that, okay, when I start my deep thinking on origin of species every day, I first do a set number of laps on this path. And that would get his mind into this set of like, okay, now it's thinking time. By lap one, the concerns of the day would start to wear away. By lap two, he could start booting up in his brain, okay, what are the actual issues I need to think about today? Maybe by lap three, he's starting to actually make some progress. Then he could go from those laps into a study and be prepared to do some real deep work. And that was much more effective than if he just said at some point, okay, deep work time, and just swiveled his chair, towards the desk and tried to work. Modern deep workers do the same thing. Sometimes it's location, a certain location they go to just for deep work. Sometimes, like Darwin, it's a particular movement pattern. You walk a particular path, you do certain blocks around your neighborhood or on your corporate campus. For other people, it's taking the space in which you normally work and transforming it. So if you have an office, for example, it might be clearing everything off your desk, dimming the light so you just have the bright desk lamp on your lamp itself, shutting the door, maybe putting a do not disturb sign on it. That transformation itself can be ritualistic and help your brain understand. The other part of these rituals that I see often with successful deep workers is they have very clear rules for how the deep work session unfolds. So they don't have to think about it. They don't have to have these battles with themselves during it. Often it's very simple things like no internet, no phone, maybe the phone gets turned off. Here's the type of breaks you can take. Like they set these rules so there's no negotiating. And all of this is about preserving mental energy so that you can really focus it on the work itself and not on trying to actually negotiate with other parts of your brain about like, well, can't we just glance at this? And do we really have to do this now?
I want to talk to you about why you advise people to embrace boredom. It's like, I've never heard such things before. Why do you say that?
Well, the simple reason is if every time you feel bored, you dispel it by giving yourself some novel stimuli from your phone or computer screen. If every time you're bored, you do that, your brain starts to develop a Pavlovian connection. Boredom means stimuli. Boredom means stimuli. If you have that Pavlovian connection built up, when it comes time to do serious cognitive work, to do real deep work, that type of work is by definition boring because there's not a lot of novel stimuli. You're focused on one thing. If your brain has been taught, I always get stimuli when I'm bored, it's not going to tolerate deep work when the time comes. And so what I advise people is not that you have to spend your entire life bored or that there's something good intrinsically in being bored. What I say is you have to have regular practice with being bored and just being okay being bored. If you do that a few times each day, what you're doing is you're breaking your brain's understanding that boredom always means stimuli. So that's why I advise people. So you don't have to be bored all the time, but you better be bored a little bit every day or your brain is not going to be able to do deep work. And so I say, go do some errands without your phone. Do some stuff. Stand in line at the bank and be in line at the bank. Stand in line at the supermarket and just be in line and be a little bit bored. It's not going to kill you, but what you're getting is this bigger advantage of teaching your brain. Sometimes we get stimuli, sometimes we don't, and it keeps it comfortable with both.
That's really what it's about. It's funny because you mentioned MacGyver. MacGyver is an incredible thinker, right? He has maybe very little resources, and I think a lot of people could identify with that because it's not everything is equal. We have people have different networks, they have different levels of education, they have different levels of finances and such. But MacGyver took like bubble gum and some duct tape, right?
Made a parachute.
Exactly. And one of his superpowers is the ability to think.
Right.
And I know we've talked about speed reading and focus and memory in the past, and you and I were kind of geeking out about critical thinking. Like our life right now is a reflection of our thinking, because how we think determines what we focus on. It determines how we feel. It determines what we do. And so really the sum of our thinking really reflects our day-to-day life, in our relationships, in our health, in our habits, in our career. I always thought it was interesting, back in school, they teach you more what to think, but not how to think.
Right.
And I think that's one of the big challenges in a world where everything is being outsourced overseas, jobs, right? Or it's being automated. There's software that could do a lot of, left brain jobs, or there's, something like artificial intelligence. What do we have as human beings? What makes us human and makes us valuable in life, in the workplace? And I think it's our ability to think, our ability to solve problems, our ability to make really good decisions. But I think it's one of those things people take for granted, because we're not just conscious of our thinking. They say we have an average of 60,000 thoughts a day. The challenge is 95% of those thoughts are the same thoughts we had yesterday and the day before that. So how do we create growth? How do we stretch ourselves to new levels? And so I love this, because I feel like you make one little distinction in the way you think differently. And there's a Oliver Wendell Holmes quote that says, a man's, mind once stretched by a new idea never regains its original dimensions. And so I want people to be able to think in a way that makes them more productive, allows them to perform better, allows them also greater peace of mind. Because in this world we've had this conversation in past episodes about digital distraction and digital depression and digital overload. It's weighing on people's health. This world where people are comparing themselves to other people on social media world, where they're comparing themselves to this highly filtered life of, every highlight reel of everyone else's life. But that all comes down to our ability to think, the ability to think for ourselves, to produce new results.
That's so powerful, man, because thinking is everything, really. It's and I've said this before, our perception is our reality. And that all has to do with what we're thinking and how we're thinking about ourself in relation to our environment, ourself in relation to ourself. And so I think it's of the utmost importance for us to really understand our thinking a little bit more. And that's why I'm really happy to have you on today. But also, how can we optimize our thinking? So one of the first things I want to ask you about has to do with decision making, because that's a big component of our thinking that has a huge impact on the results we get in our lives. So what are some of the new insights, some of the things you've been coming across lately in teaching in regards to decision making?
Yeah, I can't think exactly that our life is a reflection of all the decisions, the sum total of all the decisions we made to this point. Where we're going to live, what we're going to do, who we're going to be with, and such. And so these daily decisions, a lot of people are suffering from decision fatigue. This, and it's a big health concern. It's just people are wasting their mental energy on decisions that really don't matter in their life. And really, I think it comes down to, I tweeted this a few years ago. I said, the most important thing is to keep the most important thing the most important thing. The most important thing is to keep the most important thing the most important thing, because people are getting really good at things that don't really matter, or they're using their decisions on things that really don't matter. We've had this conversation in the past about some leaders who are wearing the same outfit pretty much every day because they don't want to waste one of their good decisions. They buy 10 of those shirts so they don't have to think about, or meal prep, and they don't want to be able to waste that. But I did a podcast recently, and I called it How to Work Smart versus Working Hard. And everyone always says, yes, of course I want to work smarter and not harder. I filmed it actually in a power plant, an actual power plant. And I opened it with this story that basically said this: one day, this really busy power plant just shuts down out of nowhere, and it's dead silent. And the employees are running around with their head cut off, not knowing what to do. The operations manager, after hours, doesn't know what to do. Nobody could solve the problem. So the operations manager picks up the phone, calls a local technician, and luckily the technician was in the area. And he says, you got to help me. We're losing all this business. Time is money. We're going to shut down. Please save us. He was like, technician's like, you're lucky. I'm right around the corner. He shows up and he walks around the power plant. And he goes to one beam. Now, this power plant is full of different beams, right? And on those beams have all these different electrical boxes. And he goes to one specific electrical box, and he takes out a marker and he puts a big X on it. And he opens up the box, and inside, as you would expect, there are bolts, there are wires, there are screws. Out of all of that, he goes to one specific screw. He turns it not a quarter of an inch, and then bam, the entire power plant lights up. And the technician's like, thank you so much. You saved the day. You saved our business. How much do I owe you? And the technician looks at him and he says, that will be $10,000. And then the operations manager was like, you must be crazy. You were here for 5 minutes. All you did was turn one screw. Any of us could have turned that screw. He's like, give me an itemized bill. And he's like, no problem. Technician reaches in his back pocket, takes out his notebook, scribbles on it for a second, tears out the page, gives it to the operations manager. The operations manager looks at it and says, I understand. He goes to his desk, takes out his checkbook, writes a check for $10,000, hands it to the man. And you zoom in on that bill and it says this, turning screw, $1. Knowing what screw to turn, $9,999. And my message to everybody who's listening is not that you have a screw loose. It's two things. Number one, we live in the knowledge economy where knowledge is not only power, it's profit, right? Specialized knowledge. That's why I love your show. And I learned so much because it's not just the have and the have-nots. It's those who know and those who don't know, right? And those who know wellness and optimization and human performance and those who just don't know better. And so there's that gap. And that's why I dedicate my life to accelerated learning. But the other reason I tell this story is not only so you could be an expert at what you do, is that there are usually one or two screws. There's one beam, there's one box, one or two screws that really are what I call a focal point. A focal point. It's one or two things. They call it, other people have called it a lead domino, right? One of the first early dominoes you hit and it knocks down other things. In military, they call it a forced multiplier, meaning that for the same amount of input, you get multiple outputs or multiple rewards. So my life, based on, my learning difficulties that I had growing up from my head injury, my sleep issues, which you've helped me a lot with, those deficits has created really a big drive in me wanting to get the most out of the energy that I have. When we're talking about resources, like going back to MacGyver, he has very little resources, but he has a lot of internal resourcefulness. And I feel like every single person listening to this has a lot of internal resourcefulness. It's things that might not be on an asset sheet, but are things like your creativity, your decision making, your ability to solve problems, your ability to meta-think, think about your thinking, your self-awareness. And that's really the owner's manual. And so when it comes to decision making, I'm really excited about this because, again, if you could just think about some of the bad decisions we've made in our life and the cost that it's had for us. I'm a big proponent on, we've had this conversation about mistakes, and a lot of people, as we grow older, we're afraid of making mistakes and we're not making decisions. And even, I would say, not like failing to make a decision is also a decision. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
sure. Like when people have a decision about what to eat or not, they go into default mode. They're still making a decision. So I feel like part of it is decision is it's a fitness. So you want to build your decision-making muscles because a lot of people are so lackadaisical, over what's important to them. So they don't really build those muscles. So they don't have that strength, if you will. But then there's also strategies besides fitness, just like in past episodes, we've talked about memory fitness and how even if you don't use a strategy like on how to remember names, you could still remember names because your brain is fitter, it's stronger, it's more energized, it's stronger, just like your physical muscles. You could also do that with your thinking muscles. And so there's strategies also. So for example, one of my favorite one is it's classic. It's called 6 Thinking Hats. And it's a great model because I feel like a lot of people aren't able to solve a problem or make a new, better decision because they're stuck from one point of view. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. It's like you wonder why somebody maybe dates the same person, or they make the same mistake financially in a business. They hire the same people, or maybe they do the same problem with their diet. And they always fall in the same pattern. It's because we never really get out of our own way and see things from another point of view. One of the reasons why I love podcasts is that, or reading books, is you get to see something from an author or an expert's point of view, and it gives you another perspective. And in order to change your perspective, I remember we did that event that you spoke at, along with, like a luminous, group of individuals, your peers, and we had Quincy Jones was one of them, and he was talking about, getting perspective, that you have to, two ways of changing your perspective is changing your place or changing the people you spend time with, because we know that who you spend time with is who you become. Because a good way of making better decisions is spend time with people who make good decisions, because this from your nervous system and neuroscience, you have mirror neurons, and mirror neurons are your, simplify it, there are your imitation neurons. The reason why is not just your biological networks or your neurological networks, it's your social networks. Because they say if you spend time with 9 broke people, you're going to be the 10th. And it's because you're constantly imitating people around you, and not just their behavior. You're imitating also, you're adopting their beliefs, you're adopting their values, you're adopting their habits, right? And we know from habits, first you create your habits, and then your habits create you.
Right.
And it's not just your habits of meditation and movement and journaling. Those are important, but really those are on the physical plane, if you will, but it's also the internal changes that are going on inside. Because when you're constantly doing something and you show up for it, as you've heard this phrase, as you do anything is how you do everything, right? You start the habit of, I'm somebody who follows through. Like, that's an identity level. I mean, that's really deep, because you change. One of the most powerful ways to make a transformation stick is to change how you look at yourself. They say that the 2 most powerful words in the English language are I am, right? Because whatever you put after that determines your destiny, or your destination in your life. And so one of the ways of changing your identity is by having these habits, because it's like you show up.
Yeah.
You show up, and when you show up constantly, all of a sudden you start looking at yourself different, and that's really powerful, to look at yourself as somebody who shows up, in life, because that will ripple into all your different behaviors. But going back to the 6 thinking hats, this is a way of changing your perspective, meaning a lot of people don't make new decisions because they're stuck in one mode. And so the summary of it, it was created by Edward de Bono, and he metaphorically created 6 color hats. And then when you imagine, and we know imagination is more powerful than knowledge, you imagine yourself putting on this color hat, you have to look at this decision or this problem through that lens. So for example, let's take the white hat. When somebody puts on a white hat, metaphorically, and I'll give you some memory aids because I'm the memory guy. White is, imagine like a doctor's uniform, right? Or a scientist is in white. That reminds you of logic. So let's say I want everybody right now, we'll make this interactive, to think about a decision that you're struggling with, or think about a problem that you need to solve. And I think everybody has one of those things, right? Going back to Quincy Jones, remember on stage, I was asking him about the problems he had, not just the successes, but the problems. He was like, Jim, I don't have any problems. He was like, I have puzzles. And that's a different way of talking about thinking, a different way of thinking about something. Because for me, when I think about problems, I'm like, something I have to deal with, and I don't know if I'm gonna be able to handle this. But puzzles like fun. Yeah. Puzzles have a solution. So it's a different way of thinking, because the words change the way we think also. But going back to this, when you you think about a problem or decision you have right now, imagine yourself putting on the white hat, and actually physically grab something in front of you and put it on, so you have your kinesthetic, your muscles in it. And you have to look at the problem or the decision just based on facts and logic. All right. So that's the only way. And that's great for individuals, because some people they're not used to doing it. But when they have that hat on, it forces you to look through that perspective.
Right. To be honest with yourself. And
exactly.
'cause I think a lot of times we're lying to ourselves on how complicated or difficult it might be.
Right.
And so actually using logic can really help to get rid of some
that's
of the
like
mystery.
that's like your Spock hat, for people who follow Star Trek. You have to look at the issue completely logically and more science based. Now, another color hat, Data.
Shout out to Data.
Yeah,
by
there
the
you go.
way.
Next
By the
generation.
way, that guy was born to play that role.
Oh my God, Brent. Oh yeah, completely. So you have to look at it analytically, and even if you don't feel like that's you play it, make it a game. And we've said this. You and I have said this before, that it's not that you stopped playing because you grew older. You grew older because you stopped playing. And so this is a thinking exercise, a thought experiment, if you will, because this is an episode all about maximizing your thinking. That's what Einstein used to do. Einstein used to do these, what he called thought experiments, these imagination experiments. And this is what we're doing right now. So you put on the white hat, and then you have to look at it through logic. You take off the white hat. Now I want you to put on the red hat. So imagine yourself reaching out in front of you, putting on the red hat, and the red hat represents, as a mnemonic device, red is emotion, red is heart. So I want you to think about now, how does this make you feel? So this gives you permission, because some people look at everything logically, but they don't go with their feelings, right? And that, we know that's a superpower also as well.
Absolutely.
So think about this problem that you have. Maybe it's somebody you need to hire. Maybe it's somebody in a relationship, whether or not you want to enter a relationship, or maybe exit a relationship. Maybe it's something you have to do with your health. Think about it now from an emotional standpoint. So you're wearing the red hat.
And by the way, some folks ignore that part.
Exactly.
They're just more bent on logic.
You're right.
And not being honest about, how do I feel about this? Or even just asking ourselves, how do I feel about this situation?
Exactly. And then when we're talking about being a better thinker, this gives you more perspective. This gives you a spectrum, or a rainbow, if you will, points of view. So you can see something. We've heard of the elephant, right? Where there's an elephant there, and you have these blind monks, and they're reaching out, and they can't see, but they just feel. And one of them's feeling like the tail and thinks the elephant is a snake. And one of them is feeling like the leg of the elephant, thinks it's a tree, right? Everyone sees different parts or feels different parts, but they don't see the whole. And through this exercise, you get to see it from these different points of views. So what are other different color hats? Take off the red hat, and now what you're going to do is you're going to put on the black hat. So you put on the black hat. Now, a mnemonic device, the black hat is the critic. All right, so what I want you to think about for a memory aid from your memory coach is imagine a judge in black robes, right? That's the one that's going to judge, right? So now I want you to look at this and think about what could go wrong here. You can meta yourself and think, be the critic here, give yourself, but some people live with the black hat and they're just critical about everything.
Right.
You know what I mean? But it makes
absolutely.
sense, because that's how they were raised, through
And it
through
can be
nurture.
valuable.
Exactly. And it could save you from making mistakes and everything, but you don't see the whole picture. And so the black hat, when you put that on, look at this problem or this decision and think about it like, what could go wrong here? And that, think about your plan B and such. Any negative consequences. Take off the black hat, and now what you're going to do is you're going to put on the yellow hat. Now the yellow hat is the opposite of the black hat. Yellow is like the sun. It's opportunity. So what could go right here? So that's if the black is more the critic, the yellow is more the opportunistic, like more of the this is like what are the benefits that could come out of
even
making a
best case
decision?
scenario,
Exactly.
the
And
outcome you want.
now some people live with the yellow hat, like a lot of entrepreneurs do this, and they just look at, the rosy side of everything, and they only see that, and then they wonder why, they don't look at the risk, they don't look at the threats, they don't look at the weaknesses or the competition or anything that could go wrong. They just move towards anything that's pleasurable, and that's not necessarily good either. So we went through this. We go through the red, we went through the white, we went through the red, we went through the black, and then the yellow. The green hat is the growth hat. So this is where you need to make a decision or solve a problem. And when you put on the green hat, green is like growth. It's like plant life. It's like growing grass, right? And so this is where you're thinking out of the box. This is the hat you wear, where it's like, what could be an out of the box, new, something we're not even thinking about solution to this whole thing, a different way of looking at it. So green is growth. And then finally, the last hat is the blue hat. And I say the blue for last because the blue is kind of like the manager of all the other hats. It listens to all the other perspectives. The one with the black hat, the white hat, the yellow hat, the red hat, the green hat. And blue is like the sky. It oversees everything else. And so it listens to everything, and then it makes the decision because it heard all the different points of view, could weigh it from different perspectives, and then that's your answer, if you will. And so this is kind of a fun strategy, and I would really encourage everyone who's listening, not just, you know this, knowledge is not power. We've talked about this. All the podcasts and the online programs and the coaching and the seminars, they don't work unless you work. So what I would challenge everybody who's listening to do is maybe take a screenshot of this episode, post it, tag both of us, and share with us a decision that you applied this to, because then you really get to feel it and see how it works in your life. I would encourage also, when everyone's listening to this doesn't have to just apply to your life. This works really well for teams. So let's say, your business, let's say you're a small business entrepreneur, you have a small group of 5 individuals on your team, and you're facing something that's an issue in your industry or something internally, like, should you do this product, or should you, stop doing this show, or whatever you need to do is get everybody in a room and then take turns wearing these different hats. This is also great for parents to teach their children at an early age because it builds empathy. It allows you to, even if I've had parents actually make out of different color pieces of paper, like these actual hats, and they'll take their children through these exercises. Children will have a question about school, they'll have a question about, going to whatever their decision is, and then you could play with this with them also as well. So it's not just your own benefit. You could do this with your team, your family, and more.
Hey, if you like this video, make sure to check out this video right here.
This was all the stuff that I used to recover from toxic mold and obesity and brain fog and chronic fatigue and all that, as well as stuff I used to upgrade myself. So I'm like, how do we make it available? And after 8 years of testing all kinds of stuff and talking with thousands and thousands of members, these 5 buckets emerged.